Small businesses will a lot of times sign a lot of interesting terms and contracts. All companies do, but the more large a company is, the more standardized and strict they are with certain terms. Small business kind of just does what they can to earn business. What type of things have you signed up for in saying we'll respond within a certain amount of time to potential incidents versus confirm? So review your contracts, figure out what the lowest common denominator, what the fastest thing is. That now becomes your response time.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Well, hey, everybody. I'm Accidental CISO, and welcome to the Mindful Business Security Show. Blue Team Con, in my opinion, is one of the best conferences for defenders, cyber professionals, and defenders. Would you guys all agree with me on that one? Oh, yeah. We're recording live in the unconference track today at Blue Team Con in Chicago. An emergency situation is a terrible time to do anything for the first time. And response drills and tabletop exercises are an important part of any cybersecurity program that allows you to test, validate, and improve your plans for how you're going to respond and what you're going to do when that emergency happens. So today we're going to talk about response drills and tabletop exercises and take questions from folks here in the audience. You know, I always have to say it. Please subscribe to the show so you don't miss another episode. And you can find it in your favorite podcast app. And while you're at it, share it with the business leaders in your network. My guest today has been hacking for over 13 years. He is the Director of Detection and Response for his employer, who shall remain nameless. Additionally, he volunteers his time and experience with nonprofits to help them understand their security posture and implement foundational security controls. And in the near future, he'll be launching a workshop with local libraries called Are You Smarter Than a Scammer? He produces YouTube videos about cybersecurity on his channel Glass of OJ. It's spelled 0J if you're trying to look that up on YouTube. And when he needs to unplug from tech and cyber, he enjoys practicing martial arts and brewing mead. It's great to have you here with me today. Thanks for joining me on the show, Odd Job.
Hey, thank you very much. Good to be on here. Long-time listener, first time being on.
First-time host, right? Yes. Yeah, it's awesome that you're volunteering your time and professional experience with nonprofits because there's just so much work to do in that space. What kinds of cyber projects are you finding that nonprofits generally are in most need of, or what kind of support are they most need of?
Yeah, it really kind of depends. You know, nonprofits can be fairly large. They can be very, very small. I think it's kind of knowing what they don't know is a big thing. Understanding how all these different apps that they've signed up for to do all their different business can be an attack surface. And I find this the same as any small business. The question I'm sure you get a lot is, well, are we really a target? We're so small, right? But if you're running any infrastructure on the internet or have any access to any platform, your good reputation is of use. And so that's a lot of times what attackers are targeting is let's act like you so we can get more spam email out. Let's get more phishing email out. And we'll use your environment as that vehicle. So at a very base level, that's kind of a lot of the prevalent things I see.
Okay.
At a base level across the board.
And since they struggle with that concept of being a target in the first place, are things like response drills even something that's on their radar?
I don't think so, right? So one of the things that you can bring up is what happens if, someone comes and tells you they just had a cyber incident or we think you just got hacked. What would you do? Who's going to be making decisions? Who's taking care of that? Usually you get blank stares. Or maybe you're talking to the person who wears all the hats,
Yeah.
So, but knowing what you're going to do is kind of the most important thing there. And as you were saying at the opener, you don't want the incident to be the time when you're going to figure this out.
No, not at all. And there's different types of response plans. I'm using the term response drill here sort of in a generic sense because there's different types of response plans. There's different ways to conduct these drills. Mm-hmm. With varying degrees of technical involvement as well. Can you talk about kind of in your experience, what is the base set of like response plans that a business should have?
Right. So, and you kind of hit it, right? That really at a base level, if you're talking about a tabletop or a response drill, one of the key things is you're testing your plan. If you don't have a plan documented, yeah, I guess the value of a response drill would be to show you don't have a plan, and so it's kind of like before that pen test, maybe vuln-scan yourself first. Well, before your IR tabletop, maybe draft an IR plan. And it doesn't have to be complicated. A lot of times what an IR plan simply does is says, who are the different roles in our company? What are their responsibilities during an incident? Take an inventory of who you have access to from a technical perspective too. And think of things not just in terms of the tech, like, that's an IT thing. I'm going to talk to IT. No, your HR, your finance, your legal, your logistics, your customer care, your sales. All of these people may need to be called upon in the middle of a cybersecurity incident to handle various aspects of it. And so you as an incident leader who'd be enacting that plan, even though you're not in charge of maybe corporate communications, you are going to be calling upon that corporate communications person and helping coordinating those efforts to make sure the right message gets out to the right people at the right time.
And, us cyber pros, talk about these things, BC, DR, IR,
Yeah.
all these sorts of things. So can you talk a little bit about that? You're talking about an IR drill specifically. Explain what an IR drill is for, non-technical business leaders that may be hearing this and wondering what that is, and maybe what the difference between that and a BC drill or a DR drill or something,
so
or a plan.
Exactly. And so think of an incident response drill as kind of like the center hub of what could be a lot of other things. You're going to start with maybe your incident response, and maybe you do need to call upon your disaster recovery plan. Maybe you do need to call upon business continuity. There are incidents where you don't have to call upon those. It's just a communications issue. You just need to handle bad press. And maybe that's all that really needs to happen. It's something really embarrassing happened. Maybe your website got defaced, right? And so, operations can continue as normal, but you have to maybe talk to the press and make sure those things are covered. So the IR exercise can be a lot of different things and incorporate those different aspects. But for instance, if you have an incident response plan, that is not your disaster recovery plan. That is not your business continuity plan. Technically are different plans in those that may be called upon by the incident response.
And I imagine the larger the organization gets, the more complex
can be
these plans can get. So with small businesses, if somebody's got a much smaller organization, there's sort of a set of table stakes information that they really should be including in their plan, just kind of at a bare minimum.
Yeah, like I said, those roles, responsibilities, having an understanding of what an incident looks like from beginning to end, right? How do we go and identify our incidents? What types of avenues do we have for people being able to report issues to us? What types of detection do we have? Do we have a third-party MSP maybe helping us detect issues in our environment, gathering those logs and raising those issues to our awareness? How are we triaging those to make sure, is that a false positive? Do we really have something here to respond to? Escalating. Not every issue needs, to the CEO's attention. So what's the appropriate level of escalation and decision making? Making sure those things are contained, mitigated, they're remediated. And also, how do we get the business back up and running? But that's not the end of it either. You have a post-mortem or post-incident phase. Depending on the incident, there could be a lot of things. It could be something big, like you're going to need to prosecute something, or you're going to need to be ready for prosecution or class action lawsuits. You're going to want to preserve evidence. Something as simple, though, as, hey, let's talk about our lessons learned. Maybe, sometimes the best tabletop is a real incident, and you learn your lesson of, we didn't have that in place. We should have. Maybe our backups didn't recover as fast as we wanted them to. So we thought we could do it faster, but we can't. So we need to figure out a way to make that faster in the future. All those different types of lessons learned from the technology, process, and people really helps you improve the next time.
Yeah, and you mentioned too backups in
Yep.
here in addition and tabletops, which sort of brings me back to where I was mentioning, like, there's different degrees of technical involvement in these, and the organization can choose how technical they want to make this test. Can you talk a little bit about, like, from maybe a tabletop at the least technical up through maybe like purple team kind of
right.
drills at the most technical, and kind of what that spectrum
Yeah.
looks like?
So generally when I've run tabletops, I kind of do both. So what I'll do is I'll actually do a tabletop on the same scenario with the technical audience, and we'll go through everything. We'll go down through, hey, what level of ability do you have in your identity access management to, disable users or detect things? What level of logging do you have? And we can go down the list and get very in-depth and technical on the most basic of incidents. And then what we'll do is we'll have an executive follow-on session where it's just the executives in the room. So we've got some technical leaders, but then largely non-technical audience. And so now the questions are a lot more high level. So we've got IT, they're handling this. Maybe we discovered a challenge in that technical tabletop. We can now bring and say, you know what, you may thought we had good backups, or you may thought that this process existed. We actually discovered that may not be as robust as we thought. So here's what's going to happen instead. How do we navigate that? What's the business decision? Do we bring in maybe a third party who can do it faster on an emergency basis? And so, getting those decisions as to who's going to make a decision about things. Payment. Who is authorized to make payments? Who's authorized to make statements? If law enforcement's engaged, who's going to talk to law enforcement? All of those things are, decisions that you want to bring to your executives and leaders, and a lot of those things are non-technical.
Yes.
It's about how do we do business when we're in this situation, and who's going to make those decisions.
Yeah, and that makes me wonder, are there mistakes then that you see folks making, maybe especially in smaller organizations where you don't have really well-defined roles? Like in much larger organizations, you're going to have C-level folks who have been in their roles
Right.
enough that they may have seen these kinds of things before,
Yeah.
whereas in a small business, maybe the first time even that leadership is going through something like this. What are mistakes that folks make in an incident kind of situation, or in an incident drill situation that makes them less effective?
Sometimes you'll get two scenarios where two people think it's their job to do that, and so you kind of see them competing for that because they feel that's their job. And sometimes you can get personalities that are very competitive, especially in small partnerships, and they're button heads. Sometimes you see the exact opposite, where no one thinks it's their job to do a certain thing, and nobody is stepping up to do it. Both of those are mistakes. Somebody needs to take initiative, or someone needs to do that. I'd much rather have I didn't know I needed to do that, because now we just pick somebody, and that's your role, and we understand that. The harder one is those personality conflicts that sometimes arise during tabletops, and it's opportunities to learn. You start seeing, okay, how are these two people going to interact with each other? And sometimes you have to make that decision. Okay, we need a clear delineation of responsibilities here, where they're going to make this call, that you might consult on it, but they're going to make this call ultimately on this. Or maybe it's the call is made by the larger group, but they're going to carry out the ultimate execution. And I'd imagine, I think you've seen more small businesses than me, but the personalities in the room become clear very quickly in those confrontations.
Yep. And something along those lines that I kind of should mention is, when I try to do assessments or tabletop drills and stuff with the team and with the leadership ahead of time, I always try to make it very clear that leadership understands that this is a test.
Yeah.
This is the time to find problems.
Yes.
Nobody on the team should be in trouble
Right.
for anything that comes out of this.
Yes.
And with the team then, to talk to them about how this is the time to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is the time to go, oh crap, we don't have a process for that, or
Yeah.
we don't have a tool to get that, or we can't get that information, or at least not quickly. Like, this is the time to find those things. And so speak up. Don't feel like you shouldn't, and if there's something else that, is bothering you about the way things are going or what you're going to be able to do in those situations that makes you anxious,
Right.
speak up, because you're not going to be in trouble. That's the entire point of this. So yeah, I think a big mistake that I try to head off because I anticipate it is that cultural thing where leadership may react negatively to the way the drill goes, when that's the entire point. Like the drill is the time to crash and burn.
Yes.
If you're going to crash and burn.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things too I see that's a mistake that people make in a tabletop is fighting the scenario, right? Well, that would never happen here, especially if it's a third party that's come in that you've brought in to maybe put on a scenario for you. They're not as familiar with your environment. It's good to kind of try and make it as close to your environment as possible in the tabletop, but you can bring in a generic and work that. And it's important to head that off, like you said, at the front, and just say, hey, this scenario may not one-for-one match up with us. Where we think that may not happen here, it's okay to call that out. Like, I don't know if that would happen here, but don't use that as we don't have to go any further because that would never happen here. No, let's discuss further because, okay, fine, that part didn't happen. Let's discuss let's use that as a discussion point to say, well, what protections do we think we have in place that would help us prevent that from happening? Okay, great. Now let's just assume for whatever the first way they got in, now they're in, and now we see this activity. So now let's start taking the next inject, or let's take this next part of the story at its value, and let's just talk through that and say, what would we do in such a scenario? Just it's kind of like improv. You say yes and move on.
Yeah, very good. Good way to put that. You're right. And something else I see with small businesses is interesting along those lines too, is when you have a scenario that involves an internal threat, disgruntled employee, something like that. In small orgs, the person who fills the fictitious role of that is generally sitting in the room. And you kind of have to preface it with, this is not about you,
right?
Bob, the sysadmin, pretend you have another coworker
or contractor
or contractor or something that has similar access to you. This is not about you personally.
Yeah.
So as we think through this, like, don't take this on yourself. And sometimes that helps them step out of that role, because when I haven't done that, I've seen the people in that role kind of get a little cagey.
Yeah.
And that's, you don't want them to be cagey because you want them to be open. So yeah. And then I love asking this last question. I ask the same question to everybody because everybody gives me such wildly different answers. If you could wave a magic wand and just magically, instantaneously have every small business owner and leader understand one thing about security, what would that one thing be? No pressure.
Oh gosh, there are right? So many things. I'm always tempted to say you can't protect what you don't know. You have, so the inventory just seems to, just across the board, this isn't even small business, this is just companies the world over, large and small. So much of it just comes from the ignorance of, we didn't know we had that, or we didn't know that was in that state. So inventory becomes such a huge thing of just knowing where it is and knowing kind of what your attack surfaces are. Small business is interesting because, you can have 5 machines, 50 machines, 100 machines. So it's a little easier to wrap your arms around the infrastructure. And I think in the small business section, what I would probably wave the magic wand for is everybody understanding that they're a target, and not in the paranoid sense, right? But just understanding that, in the great cyber war that is going on around us, there is a lot of crossfire. And we a lot of times in small businesses are just little areas an enemy can jump into and begin using us as a beachhead to launch other attacks. And that's all they're using us for. Sometimes they do want your data. Sometimes they want other things. But just understand you are a target of someone to somebody. And you do have value. There is gold there, even if you're not Fort Knox. There is gold you have that somebody wants. And ultimately, how do you ensure your company continues to exist before an incident happens? How do you get through that incident so that way on the other side you still are a company? And I think that's the most important thing that even tabletops bring here is, how do we get through this so that we are still a company at the end of this? Because that response is just as important, if not more, than making sure you're preventing. cyber attacks.
Great thoughts on that. All right, OJ, these folks are looking a little anxious to ask some questions. Are you ready to take some questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Folks, awesome. Let's go.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
Our first caller on the show today is Catherine from Colorado. Catherine, how's it going and how can we help you?
Good morning. It's going pretty well. Great con. Can't believe it's been 5 of them now. That's amazing. First time I called into your show. Appreciate the talk. Question for OJ. So, got basic security program going on. We're big enough that we're actually having to have auditors and such, and they're starting to ask all those really uncomfortable questions. So, where do I start as far as getting the incident response plan together? I mean, I'm seeing that giant blank sheet of paper, and okay, where do I begin?
ChatGPT. No, actually, bad advice. Don't go to ChatGPT, and do not put in your policies and everything into ChatGPT and say, crank me out an incident response plan. So that's actually, I see people doing it. That's not a good idea. It might be interesting to ask ChatGPT what would be, some good cyber incident response plan things to include for a type of organization. But never feed anything in there. That's my little public service announcement. I do have, and for your question, I actually do have an example SERP. Places like CISO, and there's some other organizations that do actually post their cyber incident response plan online. It's always good to look at examples and see where you can start. Where can you just replace the company name with yours? Maybe get 60, 70% of the way there, and you have to build the rest out. Getting past that blank page is tough, but finding something that can give you a good template gets you a good start, and figuring out what do I need at a minimum. Don't think you need to write a huge cyber incident response plan. In fact, the exact opposite. I've seen companies that have 60, 80 page things I can't read. It's conflicting information. A cyber incident response plan should be very high level. And some people put screen captures and click by click, here's how you do this. It's not supposed to be very technical. Roles, responsibilities, here's how we define what an incident is. When do we know we're in a severity 1, really high impactful incident versus a severity 4, very low, almost no impact? Who gets called for these different ones? What defines impact at your business? It could be monetary, reputation, outage, amount of time. It could be revenue slowage. There's probably a couple other things I could think of. Maybe just amount of data lost, records lost could be that. Lives at stake. Right? If you're a manufacturing plant or something, could be that. So just kind of have an understanding of those definitions and process, and just think about that. People, process, technology. Have your roles, have the process laid out in a way that's clear and concise, who's doing what. Oh, and avoid, when you're telling people what they're doing and what activities, don't say shall or should. Be very direct. These are the things one does. It's okay to put a condition in there, like if this is true, then this. But don't say, oh, they should do this, or you shall. That's policy type language. Doesn't really belong here. This is somewhere between an SOP and a policy. It's somewhere in between those two things. So should be specific enough, but still stay high level.
Yeah. I think the other thing I'd include is some information about communication protocols.
Yeah.
Who's going to be notified when, and that type of thing. And with the roles and responsibilities, generally, that's also going to include the roles of the responders. So an incident commander, your scribe, somebody who's documenting things, who the responders are going to be, maybe who's your communications liaison. Because you don't want your incident commander also trying to do all the communication with executives internally or customers. Like somebody needs to be focused on taking notes. And documenting. Somebody needs to be focused on handling the communication, and then the commander can tell them, go get this information for me, and they can go off and get it while the responders are doing other technical things, and it helps people stay focused. And that's an area I think I see folks mess up, as they try to pile too many responsibilities on the responders. So have it on the responders. So having that broken down in the roles and responsibilities, but having the communications protocols in there of how frequently you're going to notify your internal executives and keep them up to date. How frequently you're going to notify external people, just so that the folks that are responding can kind of keep that in front of them as well. And when to bring in legal is the other thing in the process. It really ought to be flagged in writing, because in an emergency situation, if you've got folks that are lower level in the company, engineers, IT administrators, maybe frontline managers that are part of the response, they're not going to feel comfortable necessarily reaching out to legal. They're going to think, oh, the executives need to decide that.
Right.
So having that in the steps of when you have reason to believe a breach has occurred at this point, like the instance got far enough, you're like, wait, okay, we think this is likely a breach. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go to legal.
Yes.
And, because at that point forward, you need legal involved to help maintain attorney-client privilege.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And they can advise you now. Also, declaring it officially a breach, because this is a loaded term with legal repercussions.
Define breach in your
You want
SERP.
them to help define and declare it officially a breach, because that's what starts the clock on notification of other folks.
Check your
outside
contracts.
And,
especially small business, and I didn't think about that until just now. Small businesses will a lot of times sign a lot of interesting terms in contracts.
Yes.
All companies do, but the more large a company is, the more standardized and strict they are with certain terms. Small business kind of just does what they can to earn business. What type of things have you signed up for in saying we'll respond within a certain amount of time to potential incidents versus confirm? So review your contracts, figure out what the lowest common denominator, what the fastest thing is. That now becomes your response time.
Excellent question.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
All right. Our next caller here is DJ from Chicago. Hello, DJ. What kind of question do you have for us today?
So would this be the same template you would with tabletop? And then in your experience, like what is the cadence of the tabletop you've run?
Okay. So from a tabletop, generally I run an annual tabletop, and the primary goal of that can change from year to year. The first couple times you do it, an annual tabletop, a lot of it's just going to be reviewing over the roles and responsibilities and making sure everybody's clear on what decisions are being made. But also you should be seeing year to year a little bit of progression in the maturity of the type of incident you're responding to, and it should cover something different. Maybe your first one is something that's very common to everyone. How would we respond to ransomware across our organization? All of a sudden our servers or our systems are ransomed. What do we do? But then maybe the next one is, someone hijacked our email system and now is sending out phishing emails, and, we've been spreading malware out to a lot of our customers. How do we handle that? Maybe the next one is something different. Maybe it was one of our third-party SaaS providers got hacked and all of the data is now gone or something, or maybe some of it's, missing, or how do we handle that, right? So trying to make it a little different each time, to that you're not just going over the same things, but you're bringing in a bit of novelty each time. There's also opportunity besides just an annual tabletop. Sometimes you read the news and you see a headline come up, and sometimes you just go, oh, that's interesting. Maybe schedule a 20, 30-minute quick call with a few people who would be involved in that and say, hey, by the way, so let's say that happened here. How would we be able to respond to that? So sometimes there's these great little prompts you can have, even every quarter, to just kind of grab some people and say, hey, for your specific areas, how would you make decisions in this? How would we have that? And just have a little quick tabletop. Those can be valuable too. It doesn't have to be some grand formal event each time, but you should at least have one of those annually.
Yeah, bigger companies can have really complex ones that last an entire day.
Yes.
And use teams all across the country. When I do these with small orgs, usually it's a 2-hour workshop. And I try to have, on an annual cadence with smaller businesses, is usually what we end up doing there. But we try to do like 3 scenarios. And usually one is some sort of a cyber scenario. Another one is some sort of a disaster scenario that isn't, an intentional like criminal act kind of thing, but it's, could be severe weather, could be anything, power grid issues, whatever. And then I try to do an internal threat, insider threat scenario as well, and kind of hit those 3 in that 2-hour workshop. And I try to format the workshop in a mock incident. So, we step through and we kind of, I generally act as the scribe as I walk them through it, but we, track, with timestamps and the conversation and that sort of thing, just kind of as if we were documenting an incident, we document the drill. And then afterwards they can do kind of a drill summary report that that uses their incident report template, but that it was from the drill, so that they see what all of this stuff looks like combined.
And you can even mock out how long it takes between these things, because obviously you're not going to solve an incident in 2 days, or 2 hours. Being very clear and saying like, well, this will take 3 days just to investigate the totality of this, or you won't have this answer for another 4 or 6 hours. What do you want people working on while they're doing that? And so kind of making the passage of time clear to people can be also important.
And you specifically asked about cadence, though. When I do them, usually the first chunk of the session is reviewing the plans that we're going to go through, and just at a high level, just reviewing with the team. Sort of, this is the anatomy of an incident response, and usually using like the SANS outline for that, and then we review their plans, and then we step through each of the scenarios. So it's usually about 20 minutes for just reviewing the plans and just covering what is an incident response. And then those scenarios each get about 30 minutes or so, and then try to leave about 10 minutes at the end to do a postmortem, talk about what went well, what didn't go well, what needs to be improved. And so we try to wrap the entire life cycle simulated into the drill. So from a cadence standpoint, it's usually about 20 minutes, 30 minutes for each, 10 minutes for that postmortem, at least in a small business environment now. And again, you get much larger orgs, or you get more technical drills where you're actually trying to see if your systems, people are trying to go into systems to actually do activities in the systems as you're simulating something. That obviously can take longer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Our next caller today is Justin from DC. Justin, welcome to the show. How can we help you?
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. So I actually kind of want to piggyback off something you just said, which was actively going into the systems. So we're talking about tabletops, which typically involve the internal stakeholders sitting around the table and discussing what's written on a document. So I'm curious as to if you've seen value, or when maybe you think that an incident response drill should be escalated to a more active drill outside of a tabletop, possibly to include, maybe a third-party vendor or a notification, or your legal team calling them up and saying, hey, we're doing a drill, seeing what their reaction is, seeing how that interaction with external entities might look and feel, both internally and externally.
Oh, that's so exciting. And I've really thought about this idea too, and it can be really great. I would recommend having gone through a few tabletops at least before trying that. People react to surprise differently, and I don't know about you, but even when I was in school or when I worked in an office, the fire drill always comes at the worst time, or not. It's like, it's never a good time for a fire drill. Now everyone's got to get out of the building and everything. Not everyone is always appreciative of that. But I think there is a place to bring in an active red team into the environment, have them go do something to your environment, even if it is simulated, benign, nothing is truly down. But now they have the forensic artifacts, though. So I think it's worth being able to have that, and then, see, does your SOC raise up, or does your MSP raise up and say, hey, we're seeing something weird here. Great, let's escalate it. The thing you'll have to think about there then is, who do you let know this is not a real exercise? You probably want to make sure your communications person know, if you have a comms person. Legal should definitely know, because they're probably helping you define scope and telling them where to go and not go. You might even want to make sure whoever your CEO, or if you have an owning or managing partner at your company, let them know. You want to let certain key people know this is nothing that's actually going on. One of the things that can happen that's unfortunate in those situations is somebody doesn't know that it's a drill and then has told some customers or has told some third parties what's going on. Now that could be a great way to quickly discover where your leaks and information are going to come from. Maybe that's a finding, but that could also turn into a brand reputation confusion amongst many people. That's why I say run it a few times first as a tabletop. And I think there is some value to doing this kind of simulation and bringing people to the table. I think by the time you've brought them to the table, at some point you need to say, just so you know, there is no real danger here, but we're treating like this is a real incident. There is actually a threat actor in our environment right now. We need to catch this person and kick them out and eradicate this. One of the challenges can be time. Right? A real incident would take weeks, but we're going to try to collapse this into maybe a 3-hour, maybe 4-hour, maybe a whole day exercise. Can you do that? So make sure you do that scenario, whatever it is, something that could be done and captured and taken care of within that time frame. How do you fast forward that action or whatever to being able to get to that point where we're responding quicker than what we would normally be able to do? So just think about that as you're going through. I think it's a great idea. I have not fleshed that all out myself. Some of it, just as I'm talking, I'm fleshing it out. But those are just my kind of thoughts in there. I think it's worth it. I think you should look into it. Just know the limitations of what you can really do in a 4 or 8 hour time period with your people. And are you going to make some people angry, or is your company going to appreciate that kind of a fire drill? Yeah, you need to think about the politics of it too.
It's incredibly valuable if you do it right. And it's been a couple years, but I've done a couple of these with different clients. And with penetration tests, generally you're not trying to test your processes, you're testing your other defenses and those types of things. And with these drills, you want to test your processes. So if you've got red teamers working on this, you're probably going to tell them to be a little noisier than they normally would, because you want your people to detect them so that then they can go through the process of, hey, we found this.
Yeah.
What are we going to do, and go through the actions. But where I've found it incredibly valuable is structuring a little bit differently. And I've done this using Scythe's platform, a company called Scythe. Their platform, they call it adversary emulation. And so they have researchers and engineers on their team who study actual breaches that have happened, after the fact, and what the attackers did there. And they, can kind of catalog what the tactics, the TTPs, we call them, basically how the attackers did what they did and the order that they did them in the environment to cause this breach. But their platform allows them to turn that into a scriptable thing. So you actually can have somebody in the room technically download an executable that is going to run, and then they have their command and control center that's going to make that executable do things that the attacker would have done. Now you can create your own, or you can use their pre-built ones. And how this is really cool is you do a workshop, a tabletop first, a week or two ahead of time with the team. And it may not be the entire team. Maybe it's some of the managers, seniors, whatever. And you step through, these are the different things, the specific things the attacker did. Like, they came in this way, they ran this command. And you can work with them. What will happen when that, do you think that it's going to detect? Are you going to get an alert? Who's going to get the alert? And you can document what you think should happen. Whether your systems are going to detect it or not, who's going to receive the alerts, what they will do at that time. You can document all of that. And then in a couple of weeks, when you do the live workshop, you record what actually happened. So when that command was run, you document, did their stuff detect it the way they thought it did? Did the alert fire? Did the person get it? Did they do what they were supposed to do throughout the entire process, end to end? And then as part of the report or the analysis at the end, you can diff those. And you can see they thought this was going to happen and it didn't. Or they didn't think this was going to happen and it did. Good or bad, either way. And so it is incredibly valuable to test your technical defenses. Are they detecting what you think they're going to detect? Do your people know what to do? Do they know how to use the tools to actually respond and that
Right.
sort of thing? And when I've done these before, I did one with one client that they were good. Holy cow, they were good. Like, they had great tooling. They had a team that knew what to do. They knew how to use the tool. They were so proficient with it. I was very, very impressed. But even as good as they were, that we found some spots where something didn't happen right, and they were able to make corrections on it. So you can blend this using tools like Scythe, and there's other ones out there. That's just the one
Caldera
that
is a
I've
free
used.
source one. I actually use it in
They're, yeah, you can do some, and they're so much fun to do, especially when the client knows what they're doing and isn't totally crashing and burning. I've done other ones where the client doesn't do very well. I did a school system, one of these with a school system, for instance, and yeah, it blew up on them. Like, I don't want to say failed miserably, because it wasn't a pass fail, but I mean, school districts, they have trouble. They have funding
do.
stuff like security and education and IT and stuff is not good. IT and education is not well supported. I mean, these are things that I hear in the industry a lot, so it wasn't surprising, but they were able to use that very detailed documentation out of that to go back to their board to try to get better funding and be like, look, we don't have the capability to defend or respond to this. We don't have the tools we need. We don't have the data available. We are sitting ducks. And I don't know, I was only in for that one piece of it, so I don't know where it went after that, but they had a lot of ammunition going to the board with the report from this that I really hope they were able to get more funding out of it.
Nice.
Yeah, I find it so interesting, because at the beginning of the session, we were talking about organizational incident response, and now we're talking about the technical incident response. And it's really the interaction between those two
Yes,
absolutely.
that defines what the overall response is. And I think that's the gray area, and that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, and I really like what you did there, because I had previously talked about getting that technical tabletop first and keeping it that high level, but then going to the executives and saying, well, that's maybe not going to work the way we thought it would. Now you're flipping that script and saying, let's set that expectation. What do we think would happen? And then let's have a report back after we actually test it, and not just as a tabletop. We test it as a fox hunt or a real deal scenario.
And it can
So,
function as a form of audit effectively.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Our last caller today is Samir from Indianapolis. Welcome to the show, Samir. How can we help you?
So I guess about tabletop exercises, a question that comes to mind is, for example, I work at an MSSP, and for example, there is significant change in our IT staff or cybersecurity staff where, for example, we've added like 5 more people or 6 more people to our team, or there have been some reduction and new additions. How often would you recommend that we should be doing tabletop exercises? Because every company has a different I'd say route or a different plan when it comes to tabletop exercises. And when there's a significant change where in the number of people, where there are 6 more people or new people in the team, or a few left and now we've replaced them. So to get the new people accustomed to our plan, how frequently do you recommend that we have? I'm not sure if this has been asked before. But
No, it wasn't asked. It's actually an interesting topic. So one thing I do with my SOC people is whenever we create a new playbook, we tabletop it. So every time a new playbook gets created or a significant change to a playbook gets created, we tabletop that. How are we going to work it? So let's bring the analyst in. You see this alert. It says this. What's your next step? What do you do? Try to create a little bit of those situations. You might have to make up things on the spot, but try to throw some wrenches in there. What data might they get back that points them to something else? And what you're also trying to see is, do they think outside the playbook, right? But playbooks are very much a direct, almost one-to-one, hey, how are we going to handle that? So it's more of less of a cyber incident response grand scheme thing and more of at a very tactical level, do these people understand how to navigate an incident and go through that? So, I think a tabletop is definitely important there. And again, like he said, seeing those places where we're not quite following it as we should. It's an opportunity. Is our documentation correct? Is it understood? Is it clear? Just like a big cyber incident response plan would be, do we need to make changes there to make it more clear? So I think those are opportunities to do that. If you're talking in a SOC or an MSP level where you have churn, having at least a quarterly exercise of some kind, I think would make sense. So that way everybody is practicing. And then, like I said, those little moments where you have an opportunity to say, hey, we just changed this playbook a lot. Or maybe your customer changed a playbook. You know what? It's time to just run through a little mini tabletop. Make sure everybody and your customer understands and knows how we're going to respond. Is that okay? Because in your situation, that would be something you'd want to do too. Something I also forgot about was consider, especially maybe after the first tabletop you've done, bring in appropriate third parties to your tabletop. So not just your MSP, but also maybe your insurance provider. See how they're going to respond. Maybe try to see if you can get your FBI or local law enforcement or whatever on there too, to act a little bit in there to say, here's how you would interact with us. Here's how we would respond. Here's when we need to know certain things. So that you understand those timetables. So bringing in those other partners to the tabletop as those key stakeholders so that you're not just making those assumptions, here's how they'll act. You don't know. Bring them in.
Yeah, spot on. I think in your case, the quarterly cadence is probably really appropriate. It's more than that, I think I don't want to say disruptive, but it might be a little too intense. And if you put that into policy and you have trouble making that cadence work, that may work against you, because if you have then SOC 2 audits and those types of things, if you say you do it quarterly but you can't maintain that, you might relax the policy a little bit. Shoot for quarterly, but maybe say semi-annually or something. But with the turnover, I think it's important to do them more frequently, like OJ said. And annual, at a minimum, annual is good to revisit these things. A lot of my clients are doing SOC 2 or they're doing high trust or something, so there's already a requirement for them for an annual. But even if there isn't an annual cadence required from some external reason, an annual cadence generally is pretty good, I think, for most small businesses, just because it keeps it fresh in their mind.
And try not to do an incident you see all the time. Actually look for in your detection rules or your playbooks, we've not touched this in a long time. Great time to tabletop it. What would happen if that happened? So, yeah.
Thanks, Samir.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Appreciate you coming on the show. All right. So, OJ, we've had great questions, good conversation here. Any key takeaways that you want to offer to the listeners before we wrap up?
Just one of the things is, with tabletops, it can be as complicated as you want. It can be as simple as you want. And I think especially if you're just starting out, keep things simple. And make sure you've got a decent cyber incident response plan that you've created, and start with that. And I really think that doing these tabletop scenarios again keeps it fresh in people's mind what we're doing here. And what's the true value of, security and what are we coming to do here? A lot of people just think, oh, you're the firewall or you're the person running AV or something. But it allows you as a security leader to flex a bit of your business muscle and to say, no, I'm here at a seat at the table with the rest of the business folks here, and we're talking about the company in terms of the business and how it shall operate going forward and during this incident, and truly during an incident they should be turning to you for how do we do this, how do we operate, and that should not be a first time feeling when the incident happens. Being prepared for an incident is what is it getting into the fight, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Get punched in the face. Let's start sparring a little bit. Let's get in there, and that's what tabletops allow you to do, is to feel what that punch in the face is going to be like, and what is it really going to happen, and do our plans work as they think they're going to work? You can take it to the next level from there and add in those purple team activities. But I think just starting that conversation and working it in an annual basis, just extremely valuable. So, that's.
Yeah, excellent points on that. That we have to look at our role as not just protecting value, but making the business successful.
Yes.
And that one little bit of mind shift, I think, helps keep us from being quite so insular in the way we approach security and look at it just a little more broadly across the board. Excellent points. I think my key takeaway that I want our listeners to come away with is having this process mapped out, knowing what you're going to do, who you're going to bring in, and when is going to keep you from making really important mistakes, especially in a real incident. And that interaction with legal
Right.
is one of those places. When to contact your insurance company, those kind of things. Like doing those things too late can be a problem. And this keeps folks from being so laser focused that we forgot to talk to legal counsel. But also when to do things and when not to do things, including things like kicking the person out of your system. Because a lot of times, especially with executives, the first knee-jerk response is, well, we got to kick them out. The problem is when you start making changes in your system, you potentially are going to now mutate the environment to where now the forensic evidence that you may need isn't intact.
Do you know where
anymore.
they are?
And
Truly.
so the fact that they've been there,
Right.
another 5 or 10 minutes or 20, whatever like that probably isn't your biggest concern right now. And once you get to that point, if they're still in, your biggest concern is maintaining the integrity of the environment for the forensic investigation at that point. It's not kick the person out, restore the backup, get business back up, even though that is very important and that's the knee-jerk reaction. But when you get legal and insurance and other professionals involved at the right times, they can help keep people from making those mistakes.
Well, we've seen it where people have kicked somebody out, thought they kicked them out.
Yeah.
They were still around.
Yep. Yeah.
And
it's like you find a mouse in your house and you take him out and drop him in the field and he beats you back into the house.
Exactly.
So excellent. Thank you, OJ, for coming on the show with me today. This was a lot of fun. And thank you everybody here in the audience for joining us. This is fantastic to see. Yes, thank you to everybody that asked questions today. Thank you to our listeners on the show. We do the show for you, and I appreciate that you are listening to the show right now. And I also want to put out a big thank you to Michael Coburn, the composer of the fantastic theme music on the show. So I am Accidental CISO, and until next time, stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity.